What makes a revolution? How do we access its historical values, principles, and emotions? And what stories does modern art have to tell us about its artists, who portrayed the deep cultural malaise before its wake? Rage permeates Ang Kiukok's screaming figures. Oppressively dominant, the scarlet-red background encloses all 7 figures. Its central figure jumps out, free and unchained, screaming. His hollow torso serves as the painting's focal point, as the screams radiate from it. And in solidarity with 2 other figures behind him, both his fists are clenched and raised, like a gladiator ready for battle. Collectively, the figures are united by their distressed facial distortions. Each geometric figure is conceived in retaliation to one another. Each angular stroke is emotionally charged with anguish, discontent, and fury. Upon closer inspection, spots of blue disrupt the outrage as if to offer some possible glimpses of calmness and freedom. These contrasting hues of blue and red are familiar to Filipinos. If seen through the lens of the Philippine flag, the red could stand for patriotism, valor, and resistance, while the blues signal truth, justice, and peace. Ang Kiukok's style developed through the modernist cornerstone of his contemporaries. At the turn of the 20th century, Modernism emerged in the West with its distinct stylistic legacy of mirroring socio-political shifts in all of its destruction and tumult, reflecting life in broken shards where artists found themselves needing to deconstruct perceived reality in order to make sense of the chaos, rejecting the standard as the standard rejected the truth. At this period in world history, fascism and its agents were famous for rejecting modernism's abstractions. The hegemony of European life was tense. During the Spanish Civil War, for example, the most powerful anti-war Cubist painting was made, reinvigorating the historical genre of visual art. Picasso's Guernica was created during the dictatorship of Francisco Franco and is considered the greatest anti-war mural. It allegorically depicts a scene during the bombing of the titular village, exposing the absurdity and the effects of war. It has cemented Cubism's legacy as resistance to conformity and censorship, and from then onwards, modernism has been symbolic of a historic departure from tradition, giving birth to intermingling stylistic forms from surrealism and cubism to expressionism and conceptual. Cubism was not extended by abstraction, but betrayed by it. Even as its stylistic legacy was ubiquitous, discernible in everything from office buildings to coasters, the revolutionary promise of the work remained frozen in historical amber. Revolution is a bloody day of retribution, a result of a collapsing society where its people are desperate for change. Ang Kiukok's screaming figures, completed a year before the EDSA People Power Revolution of 1986, seems almost prophetic. To quote his homecoming exhibition text in Davao City in 1981, Screaming Figures is a visual allegory for the age, or of any age for that matter. As long as abuse of power, disequilibrium, and injustice continue to exist in the world, Ang Kiukok's works are enduring records of suffering and resistance, of despair and hope. Understanding Kiukok's body of work requires understanding his early life, his mentors, personal circumstances, and most importantly, the Philippines he lived through. Born on March 1, 1931 to Chinese immigrants Vicente Ang and Chin Lim, Ang Kiukok was an only son in a family of 5 sisters. Intending to preserve their heritage, his father wanted to name him Hua Xing, which directly translates to of Chinese descent, but then decided on another name when he learned that his cousin's son had been given the exact same name. And so, with a worry about China's fate against the invading Manchurians at the time, his father named him Kiukok, meaning save the country. At a young age, Kiukok did comical sketches while studying Chinese ink and brush painting methods influenced by the traditional yet playful style of Ki Pa Shi. Early in his life, Kiukok would copy movie advertisements while tending to his father's sari-sari store, a business that he is expected to inherit and someday manage on his own. Despite his father's wishes, Kiukok pursued his formal arts studies at the University of Santo Tomas in the years 1952 to 1954 with the renowned painter Vicente Manansala as his mentor, who eventually became his lifelong friend. Kiukok also studied under the professorship of artists who are now considered masters, including Victorio Idades, Carlos Botong Francisco, Jose Garcia Llamas, Diosdado Lorenzo, sculptor Francesco Monti, Galo Ocampo, and Virginia T. When he finished his studies at university, Kiukok taught visual art overseas in China for 5 years. Teresita Angst, a former student of Ang Kiukok, wrote the epilogue on Alfredo Rosas' weighty volume Kiukok Deconstructing Despair, Ang Kiukok's artistic expressionism as a response to the archetypal Chinaman who has endured centuries of prejudice in the Philippines. Stuart A. Young writes that Angst offers a perspective on how his works can be seen as Kiukok's own personal experiences, as realities typical or common to many Chinese families living in the Philippines, a representation of the collective cathartic expression of the minority Chinese community protesting the centuries of abuse perpetrated upon them by the mainstream Philippine society at large. This is an alternative way of viewing Angst's motives in his chosen medium. His first formal recognition came from Shell National Students' Art Competition in 1995, a third prize award for his work titled Kalesa. With Vicente Manansala's encouragement, Kiukok launched his first one-man show at the Contemporary Arts Gallery. He then went on to receive several awards from the Art Association of the Philippines for works such as The Bird in 1959, Fish in 1963, and Still Life in Red in 1963. These commercially welcomed works during this time are considered to be the least angst-filled, despite the apparent rigidity in his style even in his still life paintings. His career took a turning point in 1965 when he traveled with Vicente Manansala to New York, where he was surprised by the alienation in urban squalor. Stylistically, it was here where he was heavily influenced by American abstract art, reminiscent of Francis Bacon's. It is here where his art seems to have been fully realized by his foreign influences. Masters such as Pablo Picasso, Francis Bacon, Matthias Grunwald, Graham Sutherland, Rufino Tamayo, and Rico Lebrun, while still distinct in lieu of his personal stylistic affiliations with the Philippine modernist and neo-modernist traditions. When he returned to the Philippines, his works had a new, vivid expressionist direction that included themes of madness, sorrow, and agony. These heavy themes weren't well received by the art market of the time, which caused art dealers and collectors to lose interest in his works temporarily. It was in these times, as written by his daughter Arlene Ang, when he was strongly taken over by disillusionment and an uncanny inner vision. He simply did not allow himself to be bulldozed by the public's whims, even at the risk of losing patrons and recognition. Safe, soothingly pretty subjects were not his cup of tea, and Arlene intimately accounts how his father knows life is not a bed of roses, at least not roses without thorns. In her essay Beyond the Thorny Path, Filipino art critic Maria Salva Limbo ascribes the trope of the thorny path and spike to describe Angst's artistic sensibilities, development, and aesthetics. Limbo aligns Angst's works with the traditions of the expressionists through the thorn motif, depicting Angst's works as a conversation on dissonance within the core of human existence, manifested and revealed by the realities of anguish and suffering. Arlene Ang writes that in a third world country where religion in Marxist terms is opium for the people, even his depiction of Christ's crucifixion does not seem to suggest salvation. Impaled with thorn-like nails, usually set against a backdrop of convoluted junk, his Christs may be dead, but they are still very much in agony. Yes, he died on the cross for us. But look around you. Everything goes on as if nothing has happened. He died in vain. People don't really give a damn. Even his pietas are shrouded in the darkness where Mother Mary grieves alone over her son's dead body in a wasteland of piled refuse. This imagery brought his works into the Manila art scene where his style was packaged under the term angst-filled. Recognition came as the city of Manila awarded Kiukok the Patmabay ng Kilinangan Award in 1976 and in 1978. He was awarded Outstanding Alumnus by the University of Santo Tomas. In 1980, his work Modern Angst was a finalist at the Mobile Art Awards. A decade later, he was featured with Onib Olmedo and Solomon Saprid in a show entitled Three Figurative Expressionists held at the Cultural Center of the Philippines. It is further revelatory that Ang Kiukok was shaped by the Manila of his time. Abnormality had become the pattern of everyday life, where all Filipinos are still reeling from the consequences of the forgotten Battle of Manila, a battle best remembered as the consequence of both Imperial US and Japan, destroying the city into rubble only to be treated by a band-aid called neoliberalism. By the 1960s and 1970s, when Kiukok came into his career, the Philippine government continued to grapple with corruption, civilian unrest, and foreign debt. Life was not so much back to normal as different. Perhaps no one can best describe the constant rebirth of Manila other than national artist for literature Nick Joaquin, who was born in the old district of Paco in 1917. The history of Manila can be put in 3 words: challenge and response. It almost seems as if every problem, every crisis, arises just to prove the aliveness of this city, continually destroyed and continually rebuilt, ever decaying and ever regreening. Ferdinand Marcos Sr. pushed for the creation of a new society in which old values were supposed to be rejected in favor of progress and reform. Through the military and police's brute force, Marcos embarked on a decades-long restructuring of Manila, a venture that included a reclamation project on Manila Bay and the building of cultural centers inspired by local aesthetics. During the Marcos regime, a period of countless human rights abuses and military rule, Kiukok produced violent and gruesome imagery, including screaming figures, that many critics considered political commentary on the relentless unease of the era. When asked about the pain portrayed in his art during this time, he said, "Look around you. So much anger, ugliness, and also madness." Rendering inhumane acts of man towards itself and one another, Kiukok portrayed dogfights and cockfights as soldiers. Such soldiers are depicted as animals in battle, reared and trained like cattle to fight wars that their heads of state launch at their whim. And in this rendering of the human form, where screaming figures spoke about outrage and agony, albeit as suffering wouldn't liberate man from his fate, his work, Man on Fire, contrasts with less hope. Painted 6 years before the EDSA revolution, the screams of this burning figure come as a warning against playing with matches, a warning that realization comes too late to those who wouldn't learn from the cautions of history. It is in this brutal honesty that Ang Kiukok became internationally known. His works were exhibited in Japan, Singapore, the Netherlands, Canada, and the United States. His works are currently displayed in various private collections and public institutions such as the National Museum of the Philippines, the Ateneo Art Gallery, the Cultural Center of the Philippines, and the National Historical Commission in Taipei, Taiwan. Despite these rough depictions of humanity, Ang Kiukok did showcase subjects capable of tenderness through depictions of sensitivity, passion, and love in cubist form. His Mother and Children communicates inexpressible love through the act of nurturing. His less-known Lovers, on the other hand, portray entwined figures stripped of their individual identities, resulting in a hypnotic trance-like union. His various works titled Still Life, reveals a more detached Kiukok, where objects are drained of the usual existential agony. Arlene describes these objects as complacency, as a mockery to the viewer. Are you so free and well off after all? Over time, as the Filipinos' seeming middle-class society regained a sense of democracy, his art's harsh edge softened. At the near end of his life, he created paintings of clowns with richly dressed harlequins juggling. Arlene Ang writes that these clowns were comically contorting themselves or juggling balls for the delight of their audience. They seem at first much more benign than his earlier works. But the butt of the joke is on the viewer, because it is he who is being both observed and aped. The clowns grin sarcastically or are bowed in mute despair. The richly clad harlequin with vacant smiling eyes, the bashful joker, and the vacuous deep thinker make up just another part of the sorry cast strutting the world's stage. Towards the end of his life in 2001, he was named a National Artist for Visual Arts under President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo's administration. There was a stereotypical standard set on Filipino art. Collectors of the 20th century leaned towards depictions of native festivals, or if not, flowery scenes with elegant ballerinas fit for a mid-century style bedroom. Ang Kiukok rejected these pressures. Right from the start of his career, he risked commercial notoriety in hopes of altering the priorities of an audience whose basic goals are wealth acquisition and the deception of fellow men. Ang Kiukok's success stems mainly from the honesty of his art, his daughter Arlene Ang concludes. In an interview published in his book Conversations on Philippine Art, Filipino artist critic Sid Reyes reveals the inner workings of a man known for his reticence and seemingly antisocial attitude. From the interview, it is clear that while he was born in a traditional Chinese home and brought up in a Filipino environment, Ang was not bound by such trivial and relative imaginations. Rather, when seen through his art, Ang suddenly becomes transcendent. His sense of identity as revealed through his art shows that he is above and beyond cultures and identities. Although his preoccupation is not with the typical parochial limitations, his work is imbued with an overpowering sense of urgency for universal human concerns, especially the darker, disturbing realities of human existence, which seems to be quite consistent with his seemingly reposed being and yet very violent work. Now, how do we excavate the ambers of Ang Kiukok's unsettling and angst-filled body of work? Is there revolutionary promise contained in these ambers? In answering such questions, one could turn to art professor and critic Alice Guillermo's essay, Ang Kiukok, An Art of Human Concerns. Here she contends how art could serve as a reflection of a political situation as well as a catalyst for change. Guillermo attempts, in a pioneering effort to contextualize Ang Kiukok through a semiotic framework, where she writes, Ang Kiukok believes that art is a vital part of life and should be linked to human struggles. His paintings of high impact originate from the desire to open the eyes of the viewing public to see the truth about the universal human condition, although it is also for the latter to seek deeper into the forces that construct the world and the very categories of our thinking. Filipinos find themselves once again bound by the familiar chains of disinformation. Yet as presented in Ang Kiukok's pre-EDSA Revolution masterpiece, Screaming Figures, these chains are transient. Lies are short-lived, and as Ang Kiukok did decades ago, exemplified by his works, the people who are aware and conscious of the truth have a responsibility to speak up and expose these falsehoods in any way they are able.